the New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain. It's good to be back, and it's good to have Bill Bennett in the studio. Bill, how are you?
I'm good, Paul.
Great to have you here. Maybe for any listeners who have been hiding under a rock and don't know who you are in this big wide world of tech and media in New Zealand, can you fill folks in?
Yeah, I'm a journalist. I've been writing about technology for longer than most of the people listening have been alive, I would imagine. These days I do some work for the Herald, but usually business features. But I still run a weekly telecommunications newsletter, which I run from my site, billbennett.co.nz, if anyone's interested. And I do bits and pieces here and there to do with technology writing. Sometimes my stuff appears in overseas publications and so on.
Yep, I keep seeing your work come up in all sorts of places, Bill. So always a privilege to have you on the show. Lots we wanted to talk about today. Satellite disruption causing tractors to basically stop in their tracks. We want to talk a little bit about skills shortages and how that's causing delays with fibre installations. We've had news of this cooperation, intelligence and technology cooperation between military New Zealand and Australia. We're hearing about an amnesty for students caught cheating with ChatGPT here in New Zealand. And then there's a whole bunch of things happening on the international front as well that I hope we'll have time to delve into some of those things. India getting smacked down for illegal tech import tariffs is what we're hearing, and a bunch more. So autonomous flight in there, a bit of space, a bit of AI. And so on. So let's start, Bill. The first story I heard about these tractors getting basically caused to halt in Australia and apparently also for New Zealand. Although I haven't seen any local reports. The original stories were very much seem to be coming out of Australia. The first headline didn't really ring true for me because it was talking about this one Inmarsat satellite impacting GPS was how the story went. Now, GPS is a service that you can you can publicly access for free, and there's a range of these different services. Not just now the GPS service which the US launched, but other ones that help us work out our location. But drilling in a little bit more, it seemed like this particular satellite used by a lot of the somewhat autonomous tractors that have been out and around for over a decade now. They'll guide themselves down a particular track. This satellite allows this accuracy down to a couple of centimeters. Yeah. So that was kind of the key bit that was maybe missing in one or two of the first media reports.
Well, that's right, but that's precision agriculture, as they call it, and I always thought that precision agriculture was down to a meter or two. So I wasn't aware that it was down to as distances as small as 2 centimeters. But my guess is, Paul, that is probably a bigger deal in Australia because they have different kinds of farming. I mean, we don't have the huge wheat fields here with those combine harvesters and so on that they have in Australia. So it's possibly one reason why it's different here. But it's basically back to the single point of failure because there would be other ways of getting that information. There's other places that Australian farmers can buy it. But my understanding is there's some kind of exclusive contract with one satellite, and that's the problem. The problem is it's just the one satellite. would it stop them from ploughing and sowing? I guess it could, because they probably they probably see that accuracy as vital now. Is there any information on when that's coming back, by the way?
That's a good question. I've seen there were a few other bits and pieces of information that have come through in the last 24 to 48 hours. There was a story from the Guardian about this particular issue. Said that they were stalled, due to this outage, but that in some cases they're still stuck. There are workarounds, so it seems like you can just link to the normal GPS satellites and most of these tractors, and you'll get operating again, but not at the same accuracy level. And it seems like the accuracy level that they're operating at now allows them to get much better results out of their fields. There's not as much wastage,
and in Australia,
so
water is much more of a problem in Australian farming than it is in New Zealand farming. I mean, we have problems with the water quality occasionally, but we don't have problems in general with the lack of it in this country. Whereas in Australia, they really do have to measure their water usage much more precisely than we do. I think, as I said at the start, I think it's back to that single point of failure, and really, it's more of a business issue than a technical issue, in that they've got to resolve a way of getting, a fallback system in place, so that when this happens, they're not stuffed.
Yeah, some good lessons, I'm sure, will have been learnt, and hopefully that means we don't see these sorts of oddities again. And look, we see it in an isolated case like this, where the overall impact might not be that big, but I think there are broader lessons where you leave these sorts of things going, and actually the impact can be really, really catastrophic if you've left things in place that could cause all sorts of flow-ons, whether it's with food supply, which obviously when it comes to impacting farms, there's likely to be an impact on food at some time, but this is probably not quite so urgent. But
well, I don't know. There are problems emerging with food actually worldwide. I mean, particularly because of the war in Ukraine as well.
Yeah.
So, and I'm guessing that I'm guessing from what I know about Australian agriculture, this is probably to do with the wheat farming. Is that right?
Well, I think it can impact a whole range of areas. So yeah, I think.
I mean, you don't have to worry too much about where a sheep is, for example, in 2 centimeters, but maybe a seed, a corn seed or a wheat seed, it might be important. Yeah.
I'm absolutely sure that it is. Now we've heard about Cora sent through some information around the skills shortage leading to delays in fibre installation. Now that caught me a little bit off guard, I have to say, because we've got very used to in New Zealand with the ultra fast broadband initiative. We're now in this position whereby look, we're used to being able to get a new fibre install done, very, very swiftly, and to hear that these things are taking longer. I think the commentary from Chorus was, typically 15 days from order to get a new fibre installation. That's getting it from the street into your home, so it becomes much quicker once that work has been done. But in some parts of the country, people can be waiting, 2.5 months to get their fibre install. So you can see how that's going to have an impact on business scenarios and individuals that are moving. And I guess the fortunate thing is we've got some pretty good 4G and 5G connectivity around lots of places of the country.
Well, we have. I mean, look, there's 2 or 3 things involved in this story. The first one is there is a skill shortage of fibre technicians, and our fibre network build is done for now. I mean, there could be more building there's some scope for that. But in general, it's done for now. So we're not building new networks. It is about just the installation side of things, except for in recent months, we had those incredible weather events that have done huge damage to various networks around the country.
Yeah.
And all the telecommunications companies, that would include Chorus and the fiber companies, as a rule, they'll prioritize restoring existing customers over installing new customers. It's just because, if you've been using fiber and your fiber's out, you don't want to wait 10 weeks to get that repaired. So the priority is to get people back online. And that's what they've been doing around the country. They've been going in, particularly in Hawke's Bay and in Northland and the Western Bay of Plenty. They've been going in, repairing broken fibers and so on. And that's got a lot to do with why there's a backlog. The second thing is actually a shortage of technicians here. Now, one of the reasons for the shortage is that the big builders moved on to other places. So it's a global workforce as a rule for that kind of work. And the people some of those people can go and get jobs in other places where they're now building their fiber networks. And some of them have gone. But we're still, a while ago, late last year, I was talking to JB Russo at Chorus, and he was saying that we're about 300 technicians short. Well, now they're about 200 technicians short, so it's improved. And there's some really interesting reasons why they're short. And one of them is that a lot of the technicians who came over for the initial fiber build came from countries like India and the Philippines and places around the Pacific and so on. And they got residency. A lot of those people got residency. They brought their families with them when they came. They have residency in New Zealand. And it turns out, like, what happens when you come from one of those places and you didn't have residency and suddenly you do have residency is the first thing you think is, well, okay, now I've got residency. I'm free to travel home to visit my homeland and see my family back there and so on. And a lot of them did that. And we expect a lot of those people will come back to New Zealand at some point.
Right.
They're not.
So if that happens within a reasonably short period of time for a large group of people, you actually create some pain.
Yeah, some pain. And that's definitely an element of it. And the other element of it was that people weren't coming over during the COVID period, when the country was locked down. So we basically got into a bit of mess with the number of technicians. And realistically, the government is looking at putting these technicians back on the priority lists for immigration, but I don't think that's happened yet. I think there's some kind of something's been slowing that. I'm not sure what that is, but my guess is that this problem will go away over time. But we've probably got another 6 months or so of some pain to go.
Yeah. Oh, it's a bit of a challenge for those that are caught in that position. But yeah, as we mentioned, there are other connectivity options in New Zealand now, and in most cases. And look, one thing I probably always encouraged is look, if you've got some premises and you haven't got fiber installed, get the install done, because you imagine if you had an opportunity in the past, you could have got it done quickly, and then a situation's come up where you really need it, and now you could be waiting 10 weeks, right?
They don't still have it, but about 4 or 5 years ago, what was then called Vodafone, now called One, had a product which was in effect, you booked your fiber install and you got a fixed wireless modem to stick in your house whilst you waited for the install. And then when the install came, that would act as a backstop for your fiber. Not that fiber goes out, very often. Actually,
pretty rarely. I had it actually fail at home, and there was some sort of fiber break under the house, and they had to run a new piece into the house, which was pretty unusual.
Well, it's funny because last night actually was probably the first time that I can remember that our fiber actually stopped while we were streaming TV. And it's really annoying because when it's, because it's, even if it stops just for a minute and I think it stopped for less than a minute. I think it may just have been a blip. The optical network terminator, that device, it has to reboot, and that's a 2-minute reboot.
Yeah. Okay.
And then when that happens, the router has to reboot.
Yeah.
So you're actually out for 5 minutes or something when that happens. But it was interesting because I got up from the sofa and had a look around. And I could just see these things were rebooting. So it's annoying when it happens, but it's so rare. I mean, we've had fibre for 5 years. I think that's the first time it's happened. So
yeah, it's super reliable, isn't it?
yeah.
Now very scant information's come through on this one, but we've heard an announcement that the military, Australia and New Zealand, are expanding their cooperation in terms of intelligence sharing. This is a story that I'm not sure if it's actually had any coverage locally, but picked up by the ABC in Australia. Very, very light on the detail, but I guess from my perspective and a New Zealand perspective, Australia tends to have much bigger budgets, more money to spend, and from a defence perspective, they're probably a lot more geared up than us. So you would hope that whatever they're doing on the partnership front, is probably quite helpful for New Zealand.
Well, that's true, but there's areas where they're strong, and we're not so strong, and there's areas where we are strong as well with our military. Actually, I was thinking when I saw this, I think it was in Catch-22 that the term military intelligence was said to be an oxymoron. But it's a very real thing, and there are areas where we probably have a much better grasp of what's going on in the Pacific than the Australians would, for example. And our relations with Pacific nations would be in general better in those terms. So it's not a one-way traffic. And what this is kind of linked to what's been going on with Five Eyes and the fact that the Western democracies are kind of integrating their espionage and intelligence to a much greater degree than perhaps in the past. And it's become a little bit more urgent in recent times. I mean, I don't really want to name names specifically, but if, say, for example, things were to go off in Taiwan, then this is going to be quite life or death, or could be life or death for everyone involved. So there's definitely a feeling that the world's becoming a little bit more hostile for us in Australia and New Zealand than it would have been in the past, and just a little bit more risky.
Yeah, and certainly more polarizing, situations on that geopolitical front, and then there's a whole sort of deep discussion we could go into on privacy and where our data is going and who do we trust and so on. This particular announcement didn't have a whole lot of details, so I think we'll leave it at that. Now, the other topic that's very relevant, I guess from a local New Zealand perspective, is this news that just came through in the last sort of 24 hours around Massey University students allegedly caught using ChatGPT to cheat. Being offered an amnesty in exchange for their confessions, which I find fascinating because this is it just doesn't sort of seem to line up, I guess, with the typical what you expect to be going on in a university scenario. But it highlights that probably the rock and a hard place that some institutions find themselves in, which is, look, we've built up these programs in a particular manner. We need people to submit their their assignments, and we don't, that they haven't necessarily geared up, because these things take time to accommodate for the role of ChatGPT.
Well,
and we know that it's very, very unlikely. In fact, I would say it's completely unlikely that Massey University can be 100% sure over which students have used ChatGPT versus others. Maybe not quite so much, because if you were really smart with the tools, I guess you could analyze somebody's existing content versus you get really smart with your tools, you probably can be quite black and white. But I wouldn't imagine they're going to put in that level of resource to work out who's using ChatGPT, right?
There's just so much in this story, right? But one of the things that's we're not told in the news reports is which particular students are supposed to have used this. Now, I'm going to say something which I think a lot of people listening to the podcast will may upset you, but stick with me.
Don't do it, Bill.
But stick with me, because it's an important point about this, and that is that if it's easy to write the assignments using ChatGPT, there's probably something amiss in the way that the courses are structured and assessed, because it's a gross simplification, but ChatGPT is essentially a much extended version of what happens when you type something into Google and it finishes the sentence for you.
Yeah.
Except you type something into ChatGPT and it finishes the whole essay for you.
Yeah.
And it's really just picking the most obvious things to do next. And so
it's a very smart prediction engine.
It's a prediction engine. It's a very smart one. And so if you're writing assessments where you've got to be creative and come up with original thinking and so on, then I'd imagine that ChatGPT wouldn't be very good at doing that, right? But if it's something where you have to, where there's a lot of a huge amount of material already out there that's been fed into the machine learning models that the software uses, then you know what? That's available for you to read. That's available for the students to read and assimilate and spew back out again in their own words anyway. So in a sense, I'm saying that there's something that if you as an academic institution are struggling with that, then there's something in what you're doing and what you're expecting from your students that might need to be rethinking, as well as anything to do with cheating. I'm not saying that the cheating problem is not a problem, but at the same time, I mean, I'm sure that when word processors were first used, that people might have thought that was cheating to use a word processor. I mean, obviously it's not, but you know what I'm saying? It's
spell check. We got
grammar
more
checkers,
accuracy and so on.
It's using Grammarly cheating because in a sense you're doing the same thing, just on a different scale and a different place. Yeah. So I'm not saying this isn't an issue. It is an issue, but I'm saying that it's quite right that the Massey wants to look at how it polices this, but it also should be a moment for there to be some introspection about what it is with their courses which makes this a problem in the first place. And you know something, what used to happen in some universities is the students would have to sit in front of a panel and speak, answer questions or speak and so on. And maybe we need to go back to doing more of that to assess people, rather than these assessments, which if a AI robot can write a passing assessment, then like I say, we need to reevaluate how we do assessments. There's another aspect to this, which when I read the story and stuff, which makes me a bit uncomfortable, and that is if you ask for amnesty, your mark is cut in half, right? So your mark is cut by 50%, which means you failed anyway. So what that means is if anyone, I mean, I'm assuming here that some of the students who are going to be involved in this will probably be studying mathematics, and in there somewhere
They did mention marketing students in the story that I
but
saw.
they could be students who've got some mathematical expertise, some game theory, perhaps some knowledge of statistics. Well, let me tell you, right? If you've got knowledge of statistics, you're better off taking your chances and not losing half your score. And that's another sort of bit of muddled thinking from the university about the way they're handling this. If you're going to give an amnesty, give the students an amnesty and just mark it as is.
In its entirety.
Right. Yeah. Cutting their marks in half, that's actually an incentive not to dob yourself in. And that's a silly move.
Yeah. Yep. No, I think you're 100% right on that one, Bill. Yeah, the story that Stuff shared said at least 20 Massey students have claimed amnesty in exchange for their confessions. It's a bit of a shocker, to me, but I guess there's always a framework under which these things operate. But ChatGPT is now a standard part of the tool set of what people will use to research. Look, if you're relying on it too much, then you're going to fail anyway, because it's going to come up with wrong information, false information. Certainly, it's not very good at doing maths. It's not very good at all sorts of things. And we've all probably heard about the hallucinations that ChatGPT and other AI systems have. So, I think there's a bunch of lessons here. What you say around the assessment, I do think that there are mechanisms that would allow you to give equivalent or similar sort of assignments, but whereby you would create an environment that folks couldn't necessarily lean on a tool like ChatGPT. But all of these things are going to take some time to figure out and to put in place in an appropriate manner.
Of course, there's a whole industry where you can buy essays online anyway.
And again, that's why if you can put people in maybe a sort of an offline type context, that they actually have exam rooms with computers configured in such a way that people have to go over what's in their head and not the other stuff. If that's really what you're looking for, the question is that the right way to do it? Because AI isn't going anywhere now. This is a standard part of our tool set. Probably more you want to look for people that actually are able to use the current tools, use them well, able to find out when they come up with the wrong information, and able to add their own smarts to the research that a tool like ChatGPT does.
Well, and you can rest assured they're going to use it when they get their jobs when they leave.
Yeah.
But you asked me earlier if I've been playing around with ChatGPT, and I haven't. I've been playing around with the Midjourney and the graphics. But the reason I haven't played around with it is because it's just too dangerous. I don't want to go there, because it's tempting to, and I just don't want to be get into that position. Yeah. So other than looking at it as a journalist, looking at something, point of view, I'm not going to go any further because it's just too risky.
Yeah. No, I hear you, Bill. Quite a rabbit hole. Now, India getting a bit of a smackdown for illegal tech import tariffs. Or this is what we're hearing, is that the World Trade Organization has delivered a pretty harsh verdict on India's tech import tariffs, ruling that they're out of order and that they must end. And this is interesting because they've now been in place for quite a number of years, and it's basically made it next to impossible for a range of brands to sell their product in India unless they're manufacturing them in India, because of those the really high import tariffs. So it's created all sorts of drama. it has helped India from their perspective. It's helped them with increasing the tech manufacturing that's going on there. And if you compare sort of India and China in terms of tech manufacturing, well, night and day difference. There hasn't been that much going on in India, but that has over these last few years, really tracked up. So India kind of, even if they get a little, slap with a wet bus ticket or, however it is,
I think it'll be more than that.
they're the winner. On the, well, even if it's like, yes, stop now. Now who knows whether there will be what there might be in terms of fines and other things, and even whether how much power the World Trade Organization has on that front. But they've already kind of got the advantage because so much new manufacturing has flowed in to India, probably most famously Apple,
just recently as well,
growing their manufacturing, which probably 5 years ago, was maybe nothing. I'm not sure, but it's certainly been
it's very recent, and it's precisely because of the geopolitical tensions. But mind you, India isn't necessarily on the right side of that geopolitical tension fence. Again, it's beyond our sort of scope in this podcast to talk about that. But India,
never, Bill, never. We'll take any topic on.
India, Russia, and China quite often sort of seem to be on the same side of that sort of anti-Western rhetoric and so on. So, but it's a good idea to spread your eggs around in different baskets when that could happen, because should things go pear-shaped with China, suddenly all those factories making iPhones and iPads and so on won't be available. So spreading that to India makes a lot of sense.
India are pushing back though, aren't they? So they've said they're intending to appeal the ruling, and these things take a long time. So we've got years ahead of us before it's actually settled. I mean, Kim.com can tell you how long things get stretched out, right?
And in trade disputes, that's exactly how it does work. But here's the other thing, right? India's probably had all the benefit of that tariff policy. It's not perhaps all of it, but most of the benefits that it could have from that policy have probably already been had. So it would be from India's point of view, this would be a much better time to change it than a few years ago. When it would have been hurtful. But the other thing is that all the countries which rise in the tech manufacturing and the tech sector, all of them had some form of this themselves in the past, and it's pretty much how you jump a few steps up that ladder when you're industrializing and raising the technology level of your country. So it shouldn't come as any surprise that this has been happening. I think you're right. I think it will take a while to unravel, and I think that by the time that's happened, India will have had all the benefits of having the field open to itself that it needs. I mean, there was a time when Japan was accused of doing exactly the same thing. That's a long time ago. I mean, when I was at school, it was a common subject that the Japanese, common discussion that Japanese were doing that with trade. So it's just what countries do going through that curve, and in a sense, when you get the World Trade Organization gets interested and starts slapping you down, generally that happens when you don't need the policy anymore anyway.
Now, a couple of other topics just to dive into quickly, because we're just about out of time. Merlin Labs, who have part of their work has been going on here in New Zealand in terms of autonomous aircraft, which is kind of, it's a fascinating space in and of itself, because of autopilot and so on. This sort of technology's been around in more simple forms for a very long time. But I picked up a headline that was with Aviation Week, they highlighted that Merlin are going to be trialing their autonomous flights in Alaska on cargo routes. So this technology, we know it's it's been developed out of the US, but also with work going on here in New Zealand. But this is seems to be quite a big move for them to do this sort of trial and to get that sign off from the Federal Aviation Administration in the US. So it's interesting and pleasing to see them gaining that sort of approval. It's obviously I would say an indicator of their research and development to date. Must be pretty safe to get the FAA across the line, and they're going to be doing that with Cessna Caravan, doing these cargo routes. No,
it's not a big airplane, and B, Alaska's fairly empty, so should something go wrong,
probably a good place. Good place to test.
But given that people have been using drones for a long time, and you've got things like cruise missiles and so on, which can can be autonomously steer themselves to their destination. I'd say that it's probably going to be commonplace in flight before it's commonplace on the roads, because although flight is more difficult and the potential for when things go wrong to go more wrong, it's less complicated in the fact that Alaska's not exactly chock-a-block with aeroplanes. It's not like on a road at 8 a.m. when it's just full of traffic. So I think it makes sense to do it this way.
And then there were a couple of Elon Musk related stories that he's working on his own AI. We don't have too much information on that, but he has said he's worried that ChatGPT is being trained to lean in particular direction, sort of politically. So I'm not quite sure how that plays out. And then of course the other big thing from a Musk company perspective is the Starship rocket launch, which the scale of it quite mind blowing. What did they say it was? Something like equivalent of a 40-story tall skyscraper, but a rather large explosion in the end. So it didn't work out perfectly. Is that you think this is just par for the course with these things, or you were mentioning before we started that he hadn't taken on board apparently a bit of advice, and so they were getting the expected result here, that they were sort of cutting corners.
Engineers told them exactly this would happen, yes, and they basically cut corners, and it wasn't necessarily that the explosion was because they cut corners. It was the devastation that the explosion caused was much greater than it needed to be because they cut corners. But the thing is it's kind of a metaphor for everything that in tech that guy touches. That until he took over Twitter, it looked like he might be this kind of bit weird but a genius, right? Now it looks like he's a bit weird, but maybe not so genius. You know what I'm saying? It's just his reputation as having that, as being infallible with technology is definitely gone.
He's become a lot more polarizing, and I mean certainly when you look at what we've seen in the last few days with. I lost my little blue tick or whatever on LinkedIn, and you're probably in the same boat. But virtually nobody that's lost their tick is like, oh, Oh, that's a shocker. I better pay whatever, the roughly 12 New Zealand dollars to to get it back. And part of that is probably because of just how polarizing he is, that there are folks that are just like, well, I don't want to give my money to Musk. So there's that aspect to it. A few other aspects, and we were talking a few weeks ago around Meta putting something similar in place, but more highly priced. I think about 25 New Zealand dollars. To do that for Instagram or Facebook, and I guess it's going to be rather interesting to see how that particular thing plays out. I think there is room for a premium subscription to social media, but what I'm picking here is that it's not quite so clear cut exactly what that premium subscription is going to look like. Will people spend $1 a month? Yeah, probably a lot of people would. But regardless of what the amount is, you've got to make it value for money.
Yeah.
And for the blue tick for most people, that didn't have, it was mostly the blue tick rather than there being any other benefits. And the blue tick doesn't bring a lot of benefits.
I want to say one thing about that, and then I want to get back to rockets. But my thought about that is that there's actually evidence now around the world that people have had enough of digital subscriptions, and a lot of people are starting to rethink and trim their subscriptions. Last week, when my team got knocked out of the Champions League, I quit my Spark Sports subscription because it's finishing anyway. But I've been quite conscious of cutting down on digital subscriptions because I realize that there's digital subscriptions that I have which I'm not getting my value from. And that was before I looked at whether I should be paying anything to Twitter. So, I think there's a whole issue there. And I think that we're probably, as a society, we're probably close to peak digital subscription spending for most people.
And the current sort of financial climate doesn't help, right?
It doesn't help at all. No, and what are you going to have? Are you going to have a blue tick or are you going to have a meal? It's that.
I know which I'd choose, Bill. I'll have the meal, thanks.
Yeah, exactly. But I just want to say one thing about rockets. And it's really back to the whole Musk thing in another way, right? And that is that probably 18 months ago, if we've been sitting here and we were talking about Musk's plans to get people to Mars and so on, there would have been a lot of people out there listening to the podcast, or in general anyway, who'd be really excited about the thought of traveling to Mars. I bet you that today there aren't anything like as many people who are looking forward to traveling to Mars on an Elon Musk rocket,
Yeah, look, I mean, I think with rockets, we know that it's pretty risky. There's a lot of work that has to be done. But what we have seen is with the Falcon 9s taking people up to the International Space Station, that side has worked reasonably well. So, very, very well at this point in time. However, I think it's a good reminder that space is hard and space is dangerous, and even when it seems like you're getting it all right, that may not continue. And we've seen that with Rocket Lab as well, right? So it's an area you try to make things as predictable as possible, but you don't always get there. So it'll be interesting to see where we get with that in, say, 5 or 10 years' time. Have they made all the right predictions and got it right, or will they never pull it off? And is Falcon 9 going to kind of remain their main launch vehicle? I think they've got a reasonable chance of getting there.
Yeah, I do. But I also think that there's a kind of, that reading behind the story of what happened with the recent launch, there's a bit of sloppiness there, and that really worries me when it comes to things like huge explosions. And I mean, luckily no one was killed, but that need not be the case of these things.
That's a good point.
That sloppiness has to stop.
Yeah. And I imagine NASA will be laying down the law. Well, that's us for this episode. Thank you, Bill. Always great to catch up.
Oh, you're welcome.
Now, people need to go to billbennett.co.nz if they want to sign up for your newsletter or check your most recent content.
Yeah, you won't see me much on Twitter at the moment. I've not killed my account, but I'm just not very active there at the moment. I'm just sitting it out for the moment, see how that goes.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening in, and of course a thank you to our show partners, to 1NZ, 2 Degrees, Spark, HP, and Gorilla Technology. Really appreciate the support, and of course we will be back again next week. Now, if you've been listening to the audio and you're not yet catching our videos, do make sure you have a look. You can find the videos streamed through YouTube. So you can find NZ Tech Podcast on there and subscribe. Or if you enjoy YouTube, you can also find the live streams across Twitter and Facebook under NZ Tech Podcast. And on LinkedIn, the live stream comes from my profile. So you'll need to follow Paul Spain on LinkedIn if you want to catch those videos. I find LinkedIn and YouTube are probably the best in terms of alerting you if you tick the right boxes and so on that we're streaming. And of course, if you're watching the video, then make sure you follow us through your audio podcast app, whatever that may be, whether that's Apple Podcasts, which is probably where our biggest group of audio listeners comes from, but also Spotify, Google Podcasts, and any other preferred podcast apps that you might use. Pocket Casts is my personal favorite at the moment. It has been for quite a while. But there you go. Thanks everyone. Thanks again, Bill.
Cheers, Paul.
And we'll be back again next week. All right. See ya.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.